Welcome everyone to the book launch of That's It Pancit by Patricia, Celina and Rebecca Yu, presented as part of the Asian Festival of Children's Content 2020 Digital Symposium. My name is Camille Fernandez, and I will be your MC for this launch. We hope that everyone is safe and doing all right because this pandemic definitely took everyone by surprise. Our featured children's author and illustrator for today brings something new to the table, a heartwarming Chinoy story for kids and kids at heart entitled That's It Pancit, a trilingual book about a young girl named Lily who learns what it means to be Chinese and Filipino by learning about pancit. But what exactly is pancit? Luckily, one of Anvil Publishing's favorite chef authors is here to tell us more about it. Let's watch Chef Sharwin T as he shows us his take on this beloved Chinoy dish.
Hi, I'm Sharwin T. I'm not only a chef, but I'm proudly Chinoy. And that's why I'm so excited to share with you guys a special Pancit Canton recipe to celebrate this book launch. I'm calling it Smoky Pancit Canton. I'm going to draw flavors from bacon and dashi, and that will lend its smoky, umami flavors to our favorite Chinoy dish. Okay, so let's get started with some bacon. You don't want to start in a pan that's too hot because you want to draw the flavors of the bacon. This is about 4 slices. And we're going to saute this for about 2 minutes. After 2 minutes, I'm going to add in some onions and garlic. And you just want to saute this until you can start smelling the garlic and the onion. Okay, now that you have all of the flavors of the bacon and the garlic and the onion, we add in our usual ingredients, carrots, some cabbage, I like to add some squid balls to mine. And then I'm going to add in some sliced dried mushrooms, plus the water that I use to rehydrate them. That contains a lot of flavor. I'm just going to cook these guys for 1 minute because I like my vegetables crunchy. I want as many textures as possible in my pancit canton. So now I'm going to add in my dashi. You can either make dashi at home or you can use the powdered version. And if you don't want to, you can use any kind of chicken stock, vegetable stock, shrimp stock. Alright, once we got the soup in a simmer, I'm going to add in our egg noodles. These are going to cook really quickly because they're super thin. Okay, so the noodles are about a minute away from finishing. I'm going to season with some soy sauce. I'm going to mix this up one more time. And then finally, let's thicken up the sauce with a cornstarch slurry. So this is equal parts cornstarch and water, and you want to slowly drizzle that in as you mix. Make sure it doesn't clump. And once the soup thickens up and starts to hug the noodles, you're ready. there you have it. That is my smoky Pancit Canton. The addition of bacon and dashi to your usual Pancit Canton will give it extra umami and smoky flavor, and it's sure gonna surprise everyone when you serve it at your table. Well, that's it for me, guys. I hope you enjoy the rest of this online book launch. Make sure to get a copy of That's It Pancit. And while you're there, why not get a copy of my book as well? It's entitled So You Want to Be a Chef. See you guys!
Wow. So I guess we can all agree that that was definitely mouth-watering. I am certainly excited to see how Pancit became a central figure in the book we are launching today. And of course, we have our featured author and illustrator um, to talk more about that. At this moment, I would like to call on the brilliant minds whose works we are still celebrating today in That's It Pancit. Let's start with our featured illustrator. She considers herself a love child of art and science, having graduated with a double degree in mathematics and information design from the Ateneo de Manila University. She contributes to science communication to the UP Marine Science Institute and designs book covers. Please join me in welcoming children's book illustrator Rebecca Yu.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm so thankful to be here. Hi, Camille. Thank you for that great introduction.
You're welcome, Becca. Okay, so now it's time to call on the other woman of the hour. Prior to That's It Pancit, she is the author of Blanket/Kumot. She was awarded 3 Palanca Awards for her children's poetry and 3rd place in the 2019 Nick Joaquin Literary Awards for her short story, The Sky Painter. Please join me in welcoming our featured author for today, Patricia Celina.
Hi everyone.
Hello, Pat. Okay, so
Hi, Pat.
congratulations. Okay, so congratulations, you two. It's an honor to be here as we celebrate our love for art, literature, food, and our one-of-a-kind Chinoy culture. For our friends here today, please feel free to use the Zoom chat box if you have any questions for our featured author and illustrator. As you compose your thoughts, we have a few questions to get to know Pat, Becca, and the book better. So I'm going to start with Pat first. Why did you choose Pancit to represent Chinoy culture? By the way, for those who are not from the Philippines, Chinoy is Chinese plus Pinoy or Filipino put together. So, Pat, let's start with your answer.
So I chose Pancit for several reasons. So first of all, I wanted something that Lily, the child character, could easily access. So food is one of the most tangible forms of culture, and it made sense for Lily to find answers in a familiar dish. In fact, in Chinoy culture, eating noodles is very important during birthdays because noodles signify long life. Aside from that, I really liked how Pancit's journey to the Philippines was similar to that of many Chinoys. So, noodles came to the Philippines through the Chinese that immigrated here many years ago, and then it was only here in the Philippines that it became pancit. So, the term pancit actually originated from the term pianisit, meaning fast food in Hokkien. So, it was only here that local ingredients were added and many variants of pancit appeared. I also like the idea of there being many kinds of pancit, just like there isn't just one way to be Filipino or Chinoy.
All right. Thank you, Pat, for that answer. So I have a follow-up question. Since the book tackles Lily's search for identity, what inspired you to write about this?
So growing up, I had the same questions that Lily did. So I had two of many things, and I was always wondering, did I have to choose between between something? Who was I if I had two of many things? So a lot of strangers also approached me over the years. For example, somebody told me that I spoke really good Filipino despite being Chinese, and somebody even asked me where I was from, even if we were both Filipinos. So this added to my general confusion. But when I got to college, I had a sociology and anthropology class, and it was there that I learned that there are many ways of being Filipino and everything is equally valid. That idea really brought comfort to me that my Chinese roots may make me different, but then I'm still Filipino. And I really wanted to write about it so that people who have the same questions can also find comfort in that idea. I know that identity is a very loaded question and that people have different ways to approach that answer. But I hope that at least my book can help them in their journey of self discovery.
Thank you, Pat, for sharing your insights regarding identity and the reasons why you put it there. So, my next two questions are for our illustrator. So, as an illustrator for this book, what did you have to keep in mind when designing the characters, her family, or just the book in general? Go, Becca. um,
Okay, got it under control. Okay, so thank you for that question. The two main things I had to keep in mind when illustrating this book was that number one, Lily is not only Chinese, she's Chinese Filipino, and with the rich culture of Chinese immigration, starting all the way back from our Spanish colonization, the Chinese who have grown up and rooted here in the Philippines look different from Chinese who might have grown up in Hong Kong or Taiwan, those even from mainland China. And so I took a lot of inspiration from my old family photos. I looked at I looked at a lot of group shots. Hi, it's my family to see the typical characteristics of what makes a Chinese Filipino. We our eyes look a little bit different. We have a lot of cheek in that area. So that was a visual challenge for me as an illustrator. On the other hand, I also had to illustrate not only the Chinese Filipinos, but the Filipinos without any Chinese heritage. So another challenge for me was to make sure that the Chinese Filipinos and the Filipino Filipinos look different from each other. It was really challenging for me to do that without like reverting back to racist stereotypes, but I feel like, draw on a lot of things, like keep a lot of things in balance. And that was really the greatest challenge for me in designing the characters of the book.
Thank you for sharing, Becca. So I have a follow-up question for that. Since this is your first time illustrating a children's book, how was your experience, especially where the subject is close to home?
Okay, right. So as you mentioned, I am a first time illustrator. Not only that, it's my first huge illustration project. So by training, I am more comfortable with graphic design or even mathematics. But illustrating a book is very much different from drawing still life or even drawing what you think of from your own imagination, because you have a story and it is your responsibility to enrich the story and bring out what is in the story through your drawings. So the experience, it was a really big, whole new experience. I'm really thankful to you guys, Camille at Anvil, for being patient and uh, reminding me of little things like stay away from the margins, stick to these colors, which may be boring and may have nothing to do with the illustration process, but it was very helpful for me because these are little things that could like make or break my illustrations. Um, the other part of the question I like to tackle about it being close to home was that it was a very different experience for me. Reading the story for Pat, of course she was writing her own story, but for me, there were parts that were my own story. For example, eating in Chinese restaurants with my family, celebrating Chinese New Year with them, of course, having my Chinese relatives, uh, being with my Chinese relatives. But also, there were parts that were not that familiar to me. And so, in this way, illustrating became kind of a collaborative process because I was able to go to different Chinoy friends that I had and ask them, what was your experience of Chinese New Year? What do you guys talk about at home? In my home, we speak English and maybe a bit of Tagalog. So in this way, because of my distance from the story, I was able to gather more experiences instead of being tied to my singular experience as a Chinese Filipino.
Thank you, Becca. You mentioned that it was a collaboration when working on this project. So I now have questions that the both of you can answer. So my first question has to deal with the collaboration itself. So can you guys please describe the dynamics of this collaboration?
Okay, so I'll go
Pat,
ahead.
would you like to go first?
Oh wait, sorry. I'll start with you, Pat, and then I'll go with
Okay,
you,
sure.
Becca.
Okay,
Okay,
no
so
problem.
actually it was Anvil who chose Becca as the illustrator. And at the time that I was writing the story, I didn't know who the illustrator would be. So I made sure to write an illustration guide instead to make sure that specific details were included in the book. I wanted to paint the Chinoy world in such a way that even if they weren't depicted in words, I wanted anybody who would read the book to still see different elements. For example, during birthdays, it was important for me that everybody was wearing red and that they had noodles on the table to celebrate the occasion. So I also did my best to make sure that the illustration guide wasn't specific. Illustrators are co-authors when they make picture books, and I wanted to make sure that my illustrator, whoever she or he may be, would be able to add elements of her own to the story. So I'm really glad with the way Becca illustrated the story. I really think that Lily's world came to life, and there were lots of different elements I wouldn't have thought of myself. So I'm really thankful for the outcome. How about you, Becca?
Thank you, Pat. I do agree. As you mentioned, we didn't meet each other during the whole process. Uh, your input came to me in the form of the manuscript with the illustration guides, and I was really thankful for that because I felt that I had freedom, as you intended, to bring the book to life. But I also knew what was important in the book and the freedom, especially. I was really appreciative of that because, um, as you said, I like the illustrator is the co-author, and I'm sure many artists can relate. It's very difficult to be creative when you have someone over your shoulder nitpicking on the little details. So that our spirit of our collaboration is that we were apart, but it all came together because of the way that we work. I mean, we designed the parts for each other. Thank you, Pat.
Thanks, Becca.
I'm glad that you guys were able to enjoy the process despite the fact that you were apart. But I can say that I was the bridge between you two, considering that I helped bring you two together as the editor. So, since this book is about Chinoy heritage, since the both of you are Chinoy, what do you hope this book can do for children of Chinoy descent and for those who are not? Pat, let's start with you, and then Becca, you go next.
Okay, so for me, I know that identity is a universal question, although the particulars are different for everyone. So I hope that anybody who has similar questions as me find some comfort in the book and also help them in their journey of finding answers. As for the particulars, I also hope that this book will help people appreciate our unique Chinese Filipino heritage more. So I hope also that more people are inspired to share stories of their own unique cultural heritage. And for more people to understand that culture isn't just something pure, isn't just a relic of the past, but it's a living, breathing thing, and it constantly keeps evolving. How about you, Becca?
Yes, Pat, I agree. I agree with everything that is really important about this book. When I read the manuscript, before I started illustrating, I saw how this it was unique because it tackled a complex question. I believe children have a lot of complex questions because they don't have the life experience to dissect these questions, and I'm really glad to have this piece of literature to show us that. So in the book, Lily sees a clear separation between the public sphere and the private sphere. So in public, she goes to school, she has friends who all look a little different, she interacts with the people living on her street. But in private, she goes to different occasions and events with her family. She's aware that they celebrate traditions that her peers do not celebrate. And whether or not you are Chinoy or not, I believe that every child starts to see differences between what happens in public and their private life at home. It's a universal question as well, why there is a separation, what the separation means to the child. Does that mean they belong neither here or there? I really think it's a complex question, and I think that regardless of your heritage, it's very important to have books that tackle these binaries.
Okay, thank you, ladies, for sharing your answers. Since we're on the topic of Chinoy heritage and the both of you are Chinoy, what does it mean to be Chinoy for you? So we'll go with Pat and then you, Becca.
Okay, so for me, like what Lily eventually discovers in the book, my Chinese roots make me different, but I am Filipino too, and this is home. So I'm thankful for my Chinoy heritage. I'm thankful that I had too of many things like New Year celebrations and types of food. But ultimately, I believe that the Philippines is still my home, and that's what's important. That there are many different ways to be Filipino, and this is my particular way of being so.
For me, being Chinoy means I get to eat at Chinese restaurants more often than my Filipino peers. Like Lily, I think it's my favorite part of being Chinoy. But on a more serious note, I also felt my Chinoyness in practices or customs that my peers also did not understand. I had a personal experience when I was around 7 or 8 years old, or 8 or 9 years old, in which my ampong, my paternal grandfather, passed away. And the custom for Chinese is that the immediate relatives of the one who passed on have to wear all white for 1 year, white shirt, white pants, white everything, with a mourning pin, um, which is like a black line. So if you can imagine a child being surrounded by all her friends in their like cartoon shirts, or like jeans, and you are just wearing white the entire day. For me, so being Chinoy means that there will always be a part of me that is apart from the public sphere, and then in private there will always be a part of me that is apart. I feel this most glaringly because I don't actually know how to speak Chinese. So I feel this when I am with my Chinese relatives, that I feel the apartness. There is a pull that Lily verbalizes in the book. So that is what being Chinoy means for me. But of course, as Pat says, I am both Chinese and Filipino, so I'm solid in that.
All right. Thank you, Pat and Becca, for answering that question. So I guess we can all agree that everybody's Chinoy experiences can be different, and that um, since there's like definitely a large Chinoy community here, and it's common for societies, for people within communities to sometimes feel outsiders to their in a country that they were born in. So why do you think this book is relevant now? Thank you. Okay, we'll start with Pat and then you, Becca.
So for me, I really think this book is important now that we live in an age of globalization. So people come and go to different places in the world, and new cultures are born every time people start migrating. So there's this notion, as I mentioned earlier, that cultures are static, but whatever we live out today is culture, and it is very much valid. And I wanted to emphasize that with my particular story. Of course, there are many other stories out there, and I can't wait to hear them. But that was what I intended when I wrote this book.
Yes, thank you, Pat. My question to that, sorry, my answer to that question is a little bit more political, but it is personal to me as it's related to my other work. So at the UP Marine Science Institute, a lot of our researchers do their research in the West Philippine Sea. So for a bit of background, the West Philippine Sea is is to the west of the Philippines. It is a disputed territory right now because it is part of the South China Sea, and so Chinese military have been encroaching on our territorial waters, claiming that this is theirs. Well, in fact, it is ours. So this has caused a lot of tension in Filipino current events. Actually, since that issue started heating up, I was very surprised that non-Chinese Filipinos would, they started bringing out these like hatred and comments towards mainland Chinese, or even looking a little bit Chinese would get you comments. My mom was actually concerned how this would affect me and my sister, both Chinoy. But luckily, I had a solid identity in my being Filipino. I know that I have Chinese roots, as does Lily, as does Pancit. But I have grown up here. This is where I live. This is my home. So I knew which side I stood on the West Filipino Sea issue. West Philippine Sea issue. This book, I believe, is relevant because whether or not a child is affected by this maritime issue, they might still encounter hostility from other Filipinos. But if that child is able to, grow up knowing that they have both sides of their culture, that they are not like split into two, but they are one whole, as I know. I hope that it can somewhat mitigate this hostility, that we can find a common understanding and a common thing to fight for. I believe the West Philippine Sea is ours. So I think that this book is very important in that political aspect.
Thank you, ladies, for sharing your answers. I do agree with you, Becca, that this book can help children not only of Chinoy descent understand the the Chinoy community's place in Philippine society. So I have one last question for you two. What is your advice for those who would like to write or illustrate a book? So we'll start with Pat and then Becca, as always. Okay.
Okay. So for those who want to write, I have two main pieces of advice. So the first one is to keep reading. Read as much as you can and read different authors so that you learn different styles and different ways to tackle certain issues. So if you're writing for kids like me, you also have to keep in mind that you have to know what age group you're trying to write for and to still read books from that age group. For example, I write picture books, so I still read picture books from time to time now because it's really important for me to know what stories have already been told and what new stories I can bring to the table. Writing for kids also involves a specific kind of language. It's different from when you would write a novel catered to older audiences. So it's really important that you become more familiar with it, talk with kids, learn what kids are like and what their problems are at that age. So my second piece of advice would be to keep writing. Every poem and story, every essay that you write will help you in becoming a better writer. It doesn't matter if nobody else sees what you write, but you just need to keep doing so because with practice, you get better and better. How about you, Becca?
Okay, so on my side, for the illustration, if you are looking to illustrate a book, of course, the advice is to, draw as much as you can, practice drawing. But more than that, practice drawing other people's stories, not just your own stories, other people's stories as well. I did mention that this is my first illustration project, so I might not be the best uh, consultant for this. But one of the things that helped me draw, illustrate stories was other mediums. So I have friends who work in comics a lot. I have tried drawing my own comics. I love looking at graphic novels. And the sequentialness of writing a story like that, it becomes a skill to view things visually and in sequence, to see how the visual medium implies the passage of time or implies events. So other mediums that are not children's books, you will always find something from them. My other piece of advice is that you do not have to be able to draw the Mona Lisa to illustrate a children's book. One thing I love about children's picture books is, especially in the Philippines, is that anything can be an art form. When I was a child, I know that I read books that were done in crayon, in watercolor, in colored pencils, even paper cuts. So like they would cut the pieces of paper and arrange them into illustrations. So having such a range of art forms and illustration styles means that you don't have to be afraid to stick to one style. And as long as you can work on sequential illustrations or depicting scenes, then I believe that you can definitely illustrate a children's book and go out there and practice classic stories like maybe Red Riding Hood or Jack and the Beanstalk, or even your own local tales, folk tales. I really think that makes you a better children's book illustrator.
Okay, thank you guys for answering those questions. So those are all the questions that I have, and I bet our audience has questions themselves. So it's now time to answer some questions from our friends in the audience. So we already have some coming through. So our first question is for our beloved author, Pat. How did you decide which elements were important enough to you to put in the guide for the illustrator?
Okay, so when I was making the illustration guide, I hmm, I segmented my story into different parts and tried to imagine what that scene in the story would look like in real life. So, for example, I thought back also to the practices that I had in my family. What were the key parts that made it distinctly Chinoy? So, for example, I looked at the birthday celebrations I've had in the past and how wearing red was always emphasized by my family. That was something that I wanted to include. So it was really a reflection of what transpired in my life. And I also asked my fellow Chinoy friends what was important to them. So that was what I pieced together to form the illustration guide.
Okay, thank you, Pat. So our next question is for our illustrator. So for Becca, were there any artistic influences that inspired you while illustrating this book?
The short answer is none. Um, does food count as an artistic influence? I mean, I like food a lot. Honestly, when I was being drawn into this project, the hook was that I would get to illustrate a lot of food. Um, Artistic influences. Oh, that's a hard one. No. Thank you for that question.
So I suppose it's safe to say that this is your own style, like it originally came from you.
Oh my goodness. So I have a tenuous relationship with style because every time I draw something, I do not want to draw what I have drawn before. And okay, that was another challenge for me illustrating this book because I had to draw 14 spreads and then they all had to be the same characters, in the same set in different settings but look the same. And I hate repeating myself in my drawing, so that was a challenge. Is it my own style? Yes, I believe so. I mean, I didn't copy or trace anything. It was a really interesting experience to make sure that everything looked the same from page to page.
Thank you, Becca. So we have another question. This could be for the both of you, and it's on the subject of food. So, what food would you recommend non-Chinese Filipinos other than pancit for them to have a better relationship with Chinoy culture? The list is long, but go ahead, Pat, and go ahead, Becca.
I really love Chinese food. I think that Chinoy food is my favorite out of everything. So it's going to be difficult for me to name everything. But I would say that, for example, aside from pancit, the dishes I used to wonder about, whether they were Chinese or Filipino, would be siomai and siopao because they usually sold on the streets also. So it made me confused because it was very common in the Philippines, at least when I go around. But then I knew they were also of Chinese descent, so I wasn't that sure what it would be. But all I know is that they're delicious. There are also lots of different kinds of noodles that I would recommend. In fact, noodles is my favorite food, which is also why That's It Pancit came about. So there are lots of good Chinese restaurants out there that you can try different kinds of noodles like beef wonton. So I think that there are lots of places to explore. You could start probably with Binondo, and because there are so much good Chinese restaurants there. So yeah, it's an exploration also.
Um, I think that there are a lot of traditional, common Filipino foods that already do have roots in Chinoy culture. Pat mentioned siopao and siomai. So siopao is dumpling, usually this big, it's got some filling inside. Siomai are smaller dumplings, usually wrapped in wonton wrappers and steamed or fried. So everyone in the Philippines knows that. It's so good way to have a quick lunch or quick snack. But we have other food, lumpia, so anything wrapped in spring roll wrapper or soft wheat food. The common food that we have already is includes Chinoy culture. But if you're looking to have a better relationship, then I suggest that you find a Chinoy who can take you to a Chinese restaurant or even a Chinese, eatery or diner and show you how they're eaten, have a little culture excursion.
Okay, thank you guys. So apparently you're like our audience. Okay, we have another question. It's still on food. If you could describe yourself using a Chinoy dish, which one would it be and why? Okay, so Pat, do you want to start us off? And then Becca, you can go next.
Well, since I wrote this book, would it be unfair of me to say that I would describe myself as pancit?
I don't think so. It was like, why pancit?
Oh, but why? Well, well, again, as I mentioned earlier, why pancit? So, again, I like that pancit is multifaceted. So, I'd like to think that I'm also multifaceted. And again, I have Chinese roots, but my family and I flourished here in the Philippines. So there, I would say pancit still. Although it's difficult because there's so many dishes I'd like, but I'll stick with that answer.
Um, I'm gonna go with Shaw Pao for obvious reasons. So as I mentioned, Shaw Pao is this like huge white dumpling bread thing. I feel like that describes me pretty well already. um, I don't have a particular reason. Okay, so in the Philippines, there's two main types of Shaw Pao. One is asado Shaw Pao, which is how do I say this? Asado is like sweet red pork, and it's very saucy inside. And then the other type of Shaw Pao, bola bola, is sort of like a huge meatball inside the dumpling. Um, that's not connected to the question in any way. I just really like eating Shaw Pao, and I feel like it describes me pretty well.
Thanks, Becca. I can say the same for myself. Okay, so thank you for giving out those tasty answers. We still have a little bit more time for questions. So, if the audience doesn't have any more, I actually have more questions for you too. So, my first question is, since Becca mentioned challenges earlier, so what were the challenges that you encountered when writing or illustrating your story? How were you able to overcome them? Okay, so Pat, you start off, and then you, Becca.
Okay, so when I was writing the story, there were so many things that I wanted to include at first. And I would say that one of the challenges was deciding which to include and which to remove. Because when you're writing a children's story, you have to make sure that each word works and that it also remains concise, especially because it's a picture book. You also need to limit yourself and make sure that the words are really as effective as possible. So for me, I would say that during the editing process, I had to go through many versions of the manuscripts, and Camille would know this also. I had to go through so many versions to decide what to keep, how to bring out the conflict, and how to write a satisfying ending to a question so loaded as identity.
For me, the challenge uh, was to run a marathon with everything that I was drawing. Another thing that made this challenging was that I would only draw at night because I did have, you know, I did go to the Marine Science Institute during the day. I had my own work there. So it was challenging for me on the side that I would already be tired when I started going when I started working on the illustrations of the book. It was also challenging for me that the process of the book did not really match the process I usually take with my drawings. I don't like line art, or I did not draw using outlines or lines. But it was one of the earliest steps that were requested by Anvil, which um, which I understand. It's hard to judge what's going on in the book if you already have to deal with the colors and the shading that the artist has to do. So the challenge for me was not only drawing someone else's story, not only uh, consistency in every page, but also I was introduced to, you know, the industry standard, that this is the process that they're looking for artists, and there's a reason for that, because you know you have to check the steps before you can go on to the next step. I'd say those were the biggest challenges for me.
Okay, thank you, ladies. So, okay, so I think we have enough time for one more question. Uh, since children are quite impressionable, what do you think is the most important part when writing or illustrating a manuscript that is trying to teach children? Okay, so we'll start with Pat and then you, Becca.
So for me, when writing a story for children, I think the most important part is for you to make sure that the child character has agency. So whatever problems the child is solving, the child must solve herself. She can get help from parents or friends or teachers, but ultimately it's important to empower the child and make sure that in the story we show the child as being able and brave enough to solve their problems. I think that that's the way to really to really encourage children to solve their own problems and to work through things. They know that they have the power to do so and they can ask for help, but then they have the capacity to keep going.
Okay. Becca?
Camille, could you repeat the question in terms of what the illustrator needs to answer?
Okay, since children are quite impressionable, or what do you think is the most important thing to keep in mind when illustrating a manuscript that teaches children?
Oh, okay. I believe that it's important to be very clear in what you are drawing. So stylistically, this means that maybe huge chunks of color to differentiate scenes or objects from each other. Um, I think that older folks have the patience to untangle intricacies. And I'm not saying that kids are dumb or impatient, but I mean, even if you look at the way that kids draw, they understand shapes, they understand color. So the important thing, um, since kids are very impressionable, is another thing is also that um, you like there's a balance between depicting real life, so what they can see external to them, but also you have a role in visualizing internal thoughts. Um, so if you look at the cover, even, I mean, obviously Lily never has a scene in which she is swimming in Pancit, but it's sort of like a visualization of something internal in which all these elements come together, um, with Lily's understanding of Pancit and how it comes together. So I believe children understand metaphors even though they can't verbalize them. So there's a page in the book in which Lily has like two thought bubbles, and they are parallel to each other. They show parallel things like Filipino customs, Chinese customs. This is visualizing the thinking process, and as an illustrator, playing around with a lot of being visually playful, um, helps children see or experience things that they might not know how to verbalize.
Okay. Uh, Thank you, Pat and Becca, for giving us those answers. So I have another question. So this has to do with the title. So I guess I can address this to you, Pat. So why That's It Funds It? I will admit that it has a ring to it, but why That's It Funds It?
Okay, so aside from the ring to the title, I would say that Pancit is the crucial part in the story. It is the tool that Lily uses in order to come to her realization that it's okay, this is still home. She's different, but this is still home. So I like the way that That's It also encapsulates a sort of eureka moment, that it is something that it is when it dawns on her that, hey, it's okay, I'm Chinoy. This is what it means to be Chinoy. So that's why that was chosen as the title. And of course, when writing titles, I think that as much as possible, it would be better for it to be catchy. And it's also an expression that I've heard before. I really like the ring to it. So it worked both ways.
Okay.
Yeah, that's true. Sorry, Camille.
Go ahead.
For those outside the Philippines, this is it. Pancit is like a war cry for when you need to face a difficult challenge and you're ready to plunge in. It I don't know. It doesn't have anything to do with pancit. It just rhymes. So I really like that Pat chose this for a story that plunges into questions of identity and culture.
Okay. Thank you guys. Thank you for sharing insights on why we have that title for our book today. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have left for questions. Thank you to everyone who participated in the open forum. We are nearing the end of our program, and we truly have a lot of reasons to celebrate and be grateful for. Pat and Becca, is there anything that you'd like to say to everyone who joined us here on Zoom today? Okay. Pat,
So thank you again. Yeah, okay, I'll start.
yeah.
So thank you again to AFCC for allowing us to host this book launch with the festival. Thank you to Anvil Publishing for entrusting me to write stories for the Philippine market. Thank you to everybody who attended today, especially to my family and friends. Thank you for taking the time out during your weekend to be here. And lastly, thank you to my family for giving me two of many things, just like Lily's.
For me, I would like to thank my family. So that would be my parents watching downstairs. My parents, my sister, my boyfriend. I'd like to thank my friends, both here and abroad, who pushed me to finish this, even though I didn't think I could complete a whole book. Thank you also to the people I work with at the Marine Science Institute, because they were very supportive, even though it wasn't in their realm of research. They were really supportive of me. Thank you, Anvil, for taking a chance on first time Illustrator, having never done it before. Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you, Pat, for your story, and thank you, AFCC, for allowing us to host this event. Thank you to all my mentors who nurtured my love for reading and arts, and all that has brought us here. So thank you.
Thank you, guys. Okay, so before we say goodbye, I would like to remind all of you that That's It Pancit is available on anvilpublishing.com and on Anvil Publishing's official stores on Shopee Philippines and Lazada Philippines. A question from Anvil Events. Um, so I guess we can answer, we go backtrack and answer one more question. This is about the translation. So I think I can answer that. I actually worked with a translator to give me a translation of the title. Um, uh, the answer really came from her. I told her not to make it too literal, but just to capture the essence of a Pinoy's love for puns and rhyme. So I guess I basically trusted her, considering that I don't speak Chinese or any of the Chinese languages. So yeah. So okay. Going back, I just want to remind everyone that our book is available on Shopee Philippines and Lazada Philippines. And if you need any assistance on ordering our book, please feel free to email online sales at anvilpublishing.com. So thank you everyone for joining. This book launch is presented as part of the Asian Festival of Children's Content 2020 Digital Symposium, happening from 2 to 4 of October. It featuring close to 50 speakers from Singapore and beyond Asia. Find out more about the festival at afcc.com.sg. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.